Triage. It's not just for surgeons. So today I want to talk to you about two concepts, triage and thin slicing. Thin slicing is a concept that you may have heard of from Malcolm Gladwell's book about that topic. And triage is of course a medical term. What happens is people come into the emergency room and they have different kinds of injuries, and so the doctors run triage so that they know what injuries to deal with first. For instance, if somebody is bleeding out of an artery, then we deal with that before we deal with broken bones. And we deal with broken bones before we deal with, say, a sprained ankle. So what does triage have to do with you? Well, I'll tell you. I have a brother who's doing a Master's in Business Administration program right now. I was talking to him the other day, and he mentioned something that I thought was really interesting. He said that his teachers assign him too much work for him to be able to do. There's literally not enough time in the day to get it all done. He told me that his professors assign him so much work in readings that he literally cannot get them all done. Now, if you're a student, this may sound very familiar, but he added an interesting detail. He said that his professors apparently have designed the program that way. In other words, the MBA program is designed so that it is impossible to get it all done. I don't know how common that is for grad programs across the country, but there's an important lesson here. Triage is the practice of finding out which injuries are most important and dealing with them first. Well, my brother has to run triage in his MBA program. He has to decide which readings and which assignments are most worth his attention. And there are some that he will simply not be able to do as a conscious decision. Now, the interesting thing about triage is that it's really a problem that we run into all the time. All around us, there is an incredible amount of information, and an incredible amount of resources, and an incredible amount of things to do. There's a million career paths you could go down, and a million objects around you that you could use for different things. And there's, even more importantly, a million ideas. YouTube videos, podcasts, books, lectures, college classes, apps, TV shows, the list goes on. What this all means is that at this very moment you are selecting between those millions of things and finding the ones that you believe are the most important. You may have done that unconsciously, and there's the interesting part. What if you examined yourself and you said, okay, I'm unconsciously making decisions about what is important around me and what is not important. What decisions am I making? And are those the right decisions? If you do that, you may come up with some interesting conclusions. So related to triage is an idea called thin slicing. Thin slicing was made most famous, I think, by Malcolm Gladwell's book on the subject. What he describes in thin slicing is an idea that by examining thin slices of data, we can come to remarkably good conclusions about what all of the data would say. In other words, a very small part can be very effective in revealing the whole. I have to admit that I did not in fact read Malcolm Gladwell's book. I saw it sitting on a bookcase and I didn't have time to read it, so I thin sliced it. So now let's combine the ideas of thin slicing and triage. Triage tells us you can't deal with everything in the way that you would deal with it if you had an infinite amount of time. Triage says that there's a priority to things. Triage says that some things are more important than others, even if both things are important. Thin slicing tells us that rather than examining the whole of something, you can grab smaller chunks of it and use those to get a pretty good idea, a functional working idea of what the whole would look like. One place that this definitely applies is school. You may have a lot of readings and you need to figure out which ones are more important and which portions of those to develop the most attention to. Sometimes when looking at a text, you can thin slice it and pull out the most important ideas for it. And that might be enough for the purposes of your class or whatever assignment you're working on. Other times it may be necessary to go deeper, but thin slicing is a valuable tool after you've triaged to be able to get the most out of a very small piece of data. Now, I think that thin slicing has its limits. Sometimes you want to read the whole book. Sometimes you want all the information. And that can be very valuable, especially to check your initial judgment that you made by thin slicing. However, we live in an imperfect world, and we live in a world with scarce and limited resources, including our time. We need to be able to choose how to use that time most effectively, and triage and thin slicing are two great tools to do that. Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed the video. I kind of hope that when you watched it, you put it on 2 times as fast so that you could thin slice it and triage it a little better. If you enjoyed it, we'd love a like and subscribe.